Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where yesterday it was announced that Marvel is moving ahead with yet another television initiative, causing one to wonder just how much comic book content the small screen can handle. Because not only is Marvel very aggressively in this space, but so is DC and even studios. I guess they are also technically companies, but studios like Fox are moving in with shows like Legion on FX. But I guess the people who are in the space now are doing so well, why wouldn't everybody else want to see if they could be contenders as well? Now, this is going to be in the digital space, a little bit like Netflix. Netflix has had tremendous success, of course, with their Marvel shows. And now Hulu, interestingly enough, is looking to see if they can get in on that action. I don't really know if anybody watches Hulu original content. Hulu was one of the first digital platforms for mainstream content on the scene. They were actually, speaking of Netflix, a huge challenger to Netflix early on, because while Netflix was the very first on the scene and enjoyed a copious amount of content that they could make available to their subscribers initially, eventually Hulu had better deals, and Hulu became really the place to watch current content, and that's why Netflix actually had to invest so highly in original content and be a trailblazer, because they couldn't get anybody else's content to air anymore. But I think iTunes, interestingly enough, has really taken away from Hulu. Although, on a side note, when I was at VidCon this year, I was at a panel, I was listening to a panel, and someone hinted very strongly that iTunes might be getting into original content sooner rather than later. And that would be amazing! That would blow everybody out of the water, and perhaps Runaways should have waited for that iTunes deal that could potentially have happened. But instead, they're going to be on Hulu, as Hulu tries to stand out from the crowd. Because again, I think if you're going to watch current shows, you just get them over on Apple TV or iTunes. So Hulu has secured the Runaways show. Now, Runaways has a very strong cult following. It's a great comic, too. The artist actually ended up going over to the Ms. Marvel comic. So a lot of talent over there, and it's one of Brian K. Vaughan's first huge hits. After Y the Last Man, I believe. But it's interesting because Brian K. Vaughan, for all of his success in the comic book space, he's also, of course, the co-creator and writer of Saga, which is, I think, probably the most popular and prestigious comic being produced right now. When it's being produced, they take hiatuses every now and then to recharge themselves creatively, but it shows in the work. But anyway, Brian K. Vaughan hasn't been able really to have any of his projects move to the big screen or even the small screen, and he's even had trouble himself working in the small screen as a television writer. So anyway, maybe Runaways will end the curse on his content. But I'm very curious to see the direction they take the series in, and I wouldn't be so fast to assume that you're going to see something that's exactly like the comic. All right, so who's behind it? Well, Josh Schwartz and Stephanie Savage are going to be, or Stephanie Savage, however you pronounce it, are going to be the creatives behind the show. And they're very famous for doing two other teen-based shows. The OC, which interestingly enough discovered Benjamin McKenzie, who is now the star of another comic book television show, Gotham, on Fox. And then they went on to do the hugely popular Gossip Girl. So I think you're going to probably see a Runaways show in that vein, because that's what they do. Now, they're describing it, because this gives you a little bit of an idea of the focus of at least the first season. They said 6 diverse teenagers who can't stand each other must unite to fight a common foe, their parents. That's a good pitch. But if you've read the original comic, the parents part of the story ended pretty quickly before the teens ended up going on their own adventures as runaways. So that's a very strong change to potentially make the parents stick around for longer as the foes for these characters. And when they say diverse, one of the best things about the series, and why I think it's so popular with or has such a strong cult popularity, is that not only is there diversity of ethnicity, but there's also diversity of sexuality, and also they really tried to play with a lot of the stereotypes. Like, for instance, who ends up hooking up with who. They have magic in there, like Nico Minoru, who've been talking about potentially joining the Doctor Strange situation. She's a member of this team, and interestingly enough, if that is the case, maybe she won't be in a Doctor Strange movie in the future, because she's going to be on Hulu. But my biggest question for this is what could possibly be the budget? For instance, Carolina, one of the teenagers, is this alien who can glow like a rave party, right? I don't think Hulu can afford that, and that's one of the coolest things about the show. Somebody also has a pet dinosaur, which I also don't think that Hulu can afford. So the question becomes, what exactly is Runaways going to look like on a platform like Hulu, which has limited resources? My guess would be a lot like Powers, which aired over on the PlayStation Network for 2 seasons before being canceled, but I can't tell you exactly what that would look like, and probably neither can a lot of people because nobody watched Powers. So I think that I don't know if this is a great opportunity for Runaways to really strut their stuff in a unique space, or if this is unfortunate that Runaways is going to be taken out because this really isn't the appropriate platform for them. We shall see. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story of the day is the return of Keira Knightley. Now, Keira Knightley, of course, her big break was obviously the Pirates of the Caribbean movies and Bend It Like Beckham. But then she kind of got a little bit lost. She was like, no, a little bit like Rachel Weisz. Both of them were like, we don't want to be big blockbuster actresses. And then they saw the ramifications of that decision. And Rachel Weisz, I think, never really quite recovered from that decision when she decided to leave the Mummy movies. But as for Keira Knightley, she's been a little bit more savvy because after some misfires, like for instance Anna Karenina, one of the worst movies I've ever seen, she got into The Imitation Game opposite Benedict Cumberbatch, and she did very well there. Even got some nominations, and I think she was very good in that movie. So she has a couple of now new upcoming projects she's just signed on for, and she's also, by the way, in Collateral Beauty with Will Smith, but Will Smith is really iffy these days, so I don't know if I would necessarily call that a return to form. But these two projects sound potentially much better. The first one is that she is in talks and probably will close a deal to star in Disney's upcoming The Nutcracker in the Four Realms as the Sugar Plum Fairy. But when I heard that news, I was like, but what about Misty Copeland? Misty Copeland, of course, is the most prominent, not only the most prominent ballerina working today, but the first really truly prominent black ballerina. She, of course, signed on for the Nutcracker, and I thought she was going to be the Sugar Plum Fairy because they said there will be one, performance of actual ballet in this movie, and it will be Misty Copeland. And, of course, the most famous solo in the Nutcracker is the Sugar Plum Fairy. So if Keira Knightley is the Sugar Plum Fairy, what the heck is Misty Copeland going to do? And that just seems weird to me. So we'll see. I think that, if I were Keira Knightley, I wouldn't want to take a role away from Misty Copeland. But, and who's to say that she did? But this just seems weird to me. I don't understand quite how the movie's going to come together anymore. But also, Keira Knightley, she looks a lot like the traditional idea of what a ballerina is. But I just don't know. I think there's a little bit of a missing likability factor with Keira Knightley, and I don't know if this is a great project for her. But here's another project she's working on, and I'm excited about this because it co-stars Alexander Skarsgård, who I absolutely love, and I'm so glad to see him get more work. But it's called Aftermath, based on a book, and it's one of those like English Patient, upcoming Allied with Brad Pitt and Marion Cotillard. It's one of those great passionate romances, period romances, right? Keira Knightley did one of those before with James McAvoy. I can't believe I don't remember the name of the movie. It's one that had the typewriter as the musical score. And nobody really paid any attention to that movie. But anyway, maybe this one will do better. Now, what happens here, although the setup is so romance novel, all right? So the setup is that right after World War II, in Hamburg, Germany, a British colonel is charged with helping to rebuild the city. So his wife joins him, Keira Knightley, and he surprises her by saying, guess what? We're going to share our home with this hunky German widower played by Alexander Skarsgård and his emotionally troubled teenage daughter. And you're like, I wonder how this is going to turn out. That daughter's going to terrorize everyone, and there's going to be an affair between that colonel's wife and the hunky German widower. I mean, if you saw Alexander Skarsgård, would you be like, let's live with that man? Unless, of course, you were interested in a threesome, I guess. So we'll see how the movie goes. But I'm very happy for Alexander Skarsgård, and my only concern for him is that Keira Knightley doesn't bring him down. So we'll see. Keira Knightley, she, I think, has a new lease on her career, but some of these, come to think of it, seem an awful lot like the movies she was making before The Imitation Game that nobody was interested in. All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day is that, J.K. Rowling recently said, I think Harry's story is done at the premiere of the new play, The Cursed Child. the Wizarding World, of course, is full steam ahead as if it's the Hogwarts Express. And Warner Brothers isn't going to let that go anywhere. I'm sure that there is something in, not only for Warner Brothers' sake, but I'm sure for her own sake, J.K. Rowling is just going to keep this thing going because it's a money train. So the latest announcement is that a series of ebooks will be coming out September 6th. They're small books. They're not going to be particularly long, but they're going to be a combination of archives from Pottermore, her, of course, website that is all things Harry Potter, and also some new material that she herself has written. So these are the 3 books, and then we'll talk about whether or not they're a good idea. The first is Hogwarts, an incomplete guide. Then there are 2 short story books. First is Short Stories from Hogwarts of Power, Political, and Pesky Poltergeists, which is going to focus on darker stories. For instance, a history of Azkaban Prison, which I think sounds pretty cool, actually. I wish these, J.K. Rowling is very literary minded, and so I don't like her style of writing. It's a little too detail oriented for me. I'm visually oriented, I guess, which is one of the reasons I like comic books so much. So I really wish they would release some DK books or visual guides so I could see these things that way. But they're not doing that. So anyway, the third book is also short stories, as I said, and it says Short Stories from Hogwarts of Heroism, Hardship, and Dangerous Hobbies. That's pretty cool. She's good at naming stuff. And then that's going to focus on the staff at Hogwarts. In particular, Maggie Smith's Professor McGonagall is going to have a story in there. Now, what I think is that they need to, now of course these books are coming out to get Harry Potter interest up there, and so is The Cursed Child, so their Potter mania strikes and everyone gets excited about Fantastic Beasts. But that really hasn't happened yet. One of you talked about the fact, and I agree with this, that potentially this casting of Brie Larson, Alicia Vikander, Eddie Redmayne, they're all Oscar winners, but they've never really been in major movies before, like major blockbusters. And there's a very strong chance, and I agree with this analysis, that they simply are not appealing to widestream audiences. And so all of these movies are going to struggle. So if I were Kevin Feige, maybe I would have watched to see how Fantastic Beasts does. He can't wait to see how Tomb Raider does before hiring Brie Larson. But anyway, Fantastic Beasts has really struggled to get enough attention. We'll see how it does when it actually hits theaters. Maybe it's a sleeper hit. But anyway, I would have had these books focus on stuff that had to do with Newt Scamander to make sure that people were, I think you shouldn't spread out their interest, because then they're going to be like, oh, I'm still paying attention to Hogwarts. I don't care about what's going on in America with magic. So we'll see. But, also they don't have to make the Fantastic Beasts trilogy. They've already written the script. They've signed the actors. But if this doesn't do well, perhaps they would be better served to scrap that. And I hope that they left it. I hope the ending of Fantastic Beasts could either continue or be complete, because I think they might benefit from perhaps, I think, telling a story closer to the hearts of Harry Potter fans. I mean, if Dumbledore doesn't show up, if they only name check him in Fantastic Beasts, that's ridiculous. Maybe they're saving him for the sequel, but I think that Newt Scamander might not have, after all, been the right choice. But again, we shall see. Now, as for the viewer question, this comes from frequent BTT viewer and commenter Bay McCullough, and Bay says, "Hi Grace, I has a question for you with a Z, my movie queen." That's Bay, you're fantastic. This has been, and lots of good emojis, by the way. Okay, so this has been confusing me for a while, so I hope you have some insight on the matter. What I'd love to know is why certain US blockbusters get a release in China, like Warcraft, Batman v Superman, Captain America Civil War, but others don't, like Suicide Squad, Deadpool, and Ghostbusters. Given that China is such a heavyweight in the box office, having their audience available can make or break a movie, right? Indeed, Bay. Who decides what plays in China? Is it just their government, or is more going on behind the scenes? There's always more going on behind the scenes. Well, actually everywhere, but particularly in China. But Bay says, "Love your videos." And then she said some other very nice things. Thank you, Bay. Well, I think this is a great question, and I wanted to clarify it because, we do talk a lot about whether or not a movie's going to China, and a lot of movies lately have not gone to China. It didn't hurt Deadpool, though. Imagine how much it would have made if it had gone to China. But anyway, and also sometimes China doesn't save a movie. Some movies do very well. They're like Furious 7. Some movies, do about like maybe 100 million or so. All right, so there are a couple of things that decide it. Now, China is making a lot of its own movies these days. And so the people who decide, there's like a film commission that decides which movies, it's a division of the government, they decide which movies from outside of China get a release in the country. And they do this for a couple of reasons. One, they want to protect their own film industry. And if they take in too much foreign content, they are concerned that people won't see their own homegrown films. However, it's worth pointing out that as the movie theaters in China expand to the more suburban regions of the country and non-urban places, that audience has a very strong, distinct favoritism towards homegrown content. They're actually not that interested in Hollywood movies, which is interesting. But so they want to protect their own films, not only by how many foreign films they let in, but also what the release date is for those films. That's why sometimes it'll take a very long time for a movie to hit China, because they're waiting until they want to play it. Sometimes they're waiting for a holiday season, and sometimes they're waiting for a holiday season to pass to give that preferable release date to Chinese films. Then they also give preference to films that film in China or have Chinese investors, which is why you're seeing more and more Chinese investors these days, and more films take place in China and feature Chinese talent, because it gives you a strong advantage in getting a release in China. Then also, because China is not a totally free country, and many would argue as to how free it is at all, they want to make sure, to some degree, they have to check these movies for propaganda and how they would affect the minds of their citizens. They don't want any movies to start a problem for them. So that's one of the reasons, for instance, that Ghostbusters, because they don't want any spiritual ghost stuff playing in the country. And also with Deadpool and Suicide Squad, they're like, oh, that's degenerate. It's not the values that we want to promote. Things like that. Mockingjay also had a problem getting a Chinese release date, the Hunger Games movies, because of its depiction of political revolt. So that's something that can hurt these movies. So, and also, they let Star Wars in because Disney has a lot of muscle, but for instance, Ghostbusters is like, Ghostbusters isn't a big franchise here. We don't think it would do particularly well in China. Although sometimes that's just the government excuse for maybe other reasons. So those are the different things that happen. China is a crazy place, a closed market. There's been a lot of scandal there about, sometimes, people buy a ticket for one movie, but the box office rings it up as another film, and then actually writes on the ticket with a pen where you should go for the movie you actually wanted to see. It's a really crazy place, but there's just so much money there right now. Hollywood's riding the wave. And in fact, also every studio has a Chinese division, or is getting one, where they appoint someone to go, not only people who are native to China, but they send people from Hollywood to go live and work in China to represent their interests there. So anyway, I hope that clarifies things for you a little bit, Bay, and for everyone. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Please write down below today's top 3 stories, Bay's viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.